I am Victoria Smith, Strategic Director here at GTC Scotland. And I really was delighted to be part of our Teacher Employer Conference today, due to the fact that it's so important for us to continue our interactions, and I was delighted to be talking about being a teacher with a real focus on professional update and how being professional update fits in and is crucial for being a teacher in Scotland. So between Elaine and myself for the next 45 minutes, we're going to really be talking through information about, believe it or not, Professional Update started in 2014, so we're now at the stage where we have 10 years of data and information and feedback about Professional Update and the underlying process. So we're going to share some of those reflections with you this afternoon. We're also really just going to refresh about why Professional Update is a critical element of being a teacher in Scotland and how it is central to maintaining registration with GTC Scotland, and really taking all that into consideration and all of that information. What's that mean? That's meaning for our next steps. Elaine mentioned this morning information about the new My GTCS platform. So we'll share a little bit more information about that with you this afternoon too, and then talk a little bit more about impactful teacher development and how it takes all of us across the system to ensure that the experiences of our teachers for their development are as positive and as productive as they possibly can be. So, what is PU and why is it really important? So, Pauline mentioned earlier on today that as the regulator of teachers in Scotland, our role really spends quite a great deal of time at the start of the regulation of people coming onto the register, and also ensuring that only those who should be teachers remain on the register of teachers. For the vast majority of individuals on our register, Professional Update is our ongoing liaison with them. It's that ongoing assurance to us as the regulator that individuals continue to meet essential teaching standards. And so, as you'll see on this slide, really it's an essential safeguard to the quality of Scottish education and is fundamental to the integrity of the Register of Teachers in Scotland, which of course, as Elaine mentioned in her session, standards are throughout. It's all about standards. So that is what PU is all about. From the legal point of view, in our 2011 order, there's an article within it, Article 31, that requires us to put in place a reaccreditation scheme to allow ourselves to be kept informed about the standard of education and training of registered teachers. And through discussions with partners, stakeholders at the time of the development of Professional Update, that reaccreditation scheme is Professional Update. So ultimately, it's the process by which teachers show that they continue to meet their registration. So it's a fundamental part of maintaining registration. If you are a fully registered teacher, you must maintain your registration with us by the completion of PU. There's opportunities for bringing PU forward, there's opportunities for deferring PU to take account of personal circumstances, but that underlying commitment to reflecting on the standards applies to all fully registered teachers. Quite often when we talk about professional update or PU, people think that we're talking about the very final bullet point that I mentioned on this slide here, which is that confirmation, or sometimes referred to as the sign-off part, which happens once every 5 years for the majority of cases. However, professional update is an ongoing process that happens as part and parcel of being a teacher. It's that ongoing professional learning. It's that ongoing reflection on practice and on learning, and very importantly, that ongoing reflection on the impact of that learning, taking part in those professional discussions that are really strengthening that reflection and in enabling people to set their learning targets in relation to their individual, local and national context of what would be really essential for them to take forward themselves. As well as that, providing that opportunity through really effective coaching styled professional review and development meetings, that opportunity to reflect on standards, to reflect on their career and the path that their learning would take. So none of that can happen without being deeply connected to processes that are not necessarily GTC Scotland policy and process. So I mentioned PRD there. So PRD is not owned by GTC Scotland, but it is absolutely fundamental to successful professional update. And that teachers having that contractual entitlement and responsibility to undertake that appropriate balance of professional development in order to maintain their ongoing learning record and ultimately at the end point on the evaluation of where they are, their learning, taking part in that confirmation of their commitment against the standards, saying that they have reflected and evaluated over time by doing that 5-yearly confirmation. So Elaine, you're going to take us through at the moment some information about what 10 years of professional update have told us.
I am indeed, and I've very smoothly just taken control of the slides as well, in case you wonder what happens, Victoria, when you're trying to move things forward. So thanks, lovely to be back for another session. You've got me again, and yeah, as Victoria said, I'm going to talk about 10 years of professional update and touching on what Polly mentioned this morning, the key things that have come from those 10 years. It's a long time, 10 years, you know, and when I think back to the age I was then and everything that's happened, is a huge amount of time, really large number of teachers that have completed surveys, so much information that we've gathered around it. So it's been quite a task, I suppose, just actually summarising what the key findings actually are. And just to reiterate again, the process that we're looking at is about how teachers, excuse me, how teachers are confirming that they're still reflecting against the standards and developing their knowledge, their understanding and their skills. That's the key bit that we're really looking at. So this seemed the perfect time, 1 decade on, 10 years on, let's look at what the key findings are from the previous years. So we have reviewed the data using 3 different sources. The first one we're still waiting to have finalised before it's shared, but as was mentioned this morning, University of Glasgow have done some external research for us, and there's findings from that which will also inform things moving forward, and will feed into our overall key messages as we move forward. The summary of what the decade of data actually tells us. So I think it's probably fair to me to say I think that's been quite a laborious task in terms of working out actually what that data is. So those of you, and I hope it's many of you, that have completed the survey after having signed off your PU year, if you complete the survey, there are over 60 questions that you're asked about the process and what the engagement, what the experience has been like for you. And what we've done is we have tracked what those responses have been like right back in 2014 to 2015 and annually and looked at how the numbers are changing in terms of those that perhaps agree strongly, that those that disagree, and taking on board comments that are made. So we've managed to see trends there, which has been really informative for us and will inform what I'm going to share. But there's also, as the really technical language that I used in my previous session about having heaps of knowledge, there's also heaps of knowledge that we have internally about PU and how it's managed and what the experience is actually like for the users. Because obviously, when things don't work, it's ourselves that you get in touch with in terms of, I can't access this, I can't sign off, I can't make an association with my reviewer. And we are very aware that probably that aspect has been the most frustrating for users in terms of the actual experience of using the system. And it's a real shame when that gets in the way of us actually finding out about reflection and hearing about reflection against the standards. So obviously that's something that we take very seriously, and we're aware that as time has gone on and continues to go on, it would be less likely to improve, but it's something that's going to get slower and even less reliable. So we have paid a lot of attention to that as well. So there are 10 little icons here that I'm going to move through, and these are the key findings. And I suppose what we'd ask you to think about is, in terms of your own PRD, how can you relate to each of these in terms of your own experience of when you've had your PRD conversations? And also, if you've been in the situation where you are a reviewer, which I would imagine many of you are, how can you take on board the key findings from here to think about what's the experience like for the reviewee when I'm engaging in a PRD conversation? So number one, high quality PRD is essential given it's firmly linked to PU, and that means it must focus on teaching standards. What we sometimes hear is that teachers say that PRD is actually the only time that they think about the standards. And I suppose, again, linking back to what we were saying this morning, I think standards are such an integral part of being a beginning teacher, where we're constantly looking at standards. But of course, that stand for provisional registration and standard for full registration. But actually, as we move through our careers, we should still be looking back and reflecting against the standards constantly. So, perhaps it's standard for career-long professional learning, standard for middle leadership, or indeed standard for headship. So how often do we actually come back and revisit that, and how do we look at weaving the standards in over the course of the year, but making sure that PRD conversation does involve the standards, so that both parties involved know that there needs to be, in preparation for the meeting, there needs to be a familiarisation and understanding of the standards, and indeed some thought given to which standard do I actually want to focus on today for my meeting, because we wouldn't expect that somebody came along to a PRD saying, I've been reflecting against all five, the whole suite, and COPAC as well. And I've been, thinking about all of that. It really should be focusing in on a particular standard or standards. And just incidentally, what the data has shown is that it's the standard for career-long professional learning is the one that most teachers are choosing to reflect against when preparing for their PRD conversation. So that's the first one. Second one, so sometimes in the conversations, and you'll be aware of this, that there are other areas that are spoken about and that feature in the reflections and indeed in the impact perhaps of professional learning, for example, Hygieus. So that's fine. You know, obviously it's the education system as a whole that will develop a teacher and that a teacher will engage in for their professional learning. What you as a reviewer need to do and as a reviewee is we still need to go back to actually thinking about, okay, so how does that relate to the standards? So I know that, but actually, how does that change what I do within the SFR or the standard for CLPL? How does that impact that? How does it influence now that I know that as part of Hygieus? So we would encourage that wider system awareness, if you like, but always bringing it back to the standards as the core focus for the conversation. Number 3 is recording of development and learning activity. It should prioritise focusing on reflection of what has been learned, including its impact. So one of the favourite questions that we would ask with beginning teachers when they are completing their profile is, as you can imagine, with beginning teachers, we have absolutely screeds of professional learning that they have engaged in because the whole year is about professional learning. But it's the question, so what? And that keeps coming up time and time and time again. Great, you've done that for a year, you've focused on that for 6 months, you've committed to that over and above your school day. So what? What's the impact on you as a teacher? And ultimately, what's the impact on the young people, the learners in your classroom? That's so what question. And that's what we need to ask of our teachers. And as a teacher, that's what we need to think about in terms of our reflection against the professional development, the professional learning that we have engaged in. When we're recording it, we need to make really clear what's the difference? What's the difference that we plan it will make, or indeed it already has, so that when we're having a conversation with our reviewer, both people are aware of that, the answer to the so what question. Number 4 then, a greater focus on the impact of professional learning is required. So that links very strongly to the third one. What's the impact? So number 3 is perhaps thinking, right, so what am I going to do? And number 4 is what's the actual difference in terms of, if it's around raising attainment, how do you know? How are you going to record that? How are you going to gauge what's the difference in impact that has actually been made? So make sure that is also part of the reflection. Number 5, collaboration with colleagues. I thought that was interesting that came through as a key one, because again, with beginning teachers, I think it's something that they are used to doing, and it's something that perhaps they expect to do. I was going to say they're more comfortable doing. I'm not sure that they are comfortable doing it, but I think it's something that they expect to be a part of their experience in terms of either in groups or sharing with, their stage partner. Often we find with the great core programs of professional learning that are in place for provisionally registered teachers, very often we hear from fully registered teachers who are much further into their career. We hear them saying, I'd love to be a part of that. I wish I could engage in a professional learning program like that, where I don't have to go and create it. I don't have to go and find it. It's there and it's happening regularly and there's dedicated time for it. And often what we feed back is that, wouldn't it be great if the provisional registrants have time given to them to actually have 10 minutes at a staff meeting to share that bit about the impact, the answer to the so what question, about the professional learning that they've engaged in. But I suppose what happens is it becomes more difficult once they move on to the next stage of their career, because where does that time come from? And perhaps there are less opportunities. So maybe it's a bit about thinking, how do we manage to create that time so that things that our colleagues are learning about actually have a chance to become embedded, and that knowledge is not just sitting with one person, but actually, it permeates out wider than that. And it doesn't have to be across the whole staff. Maybe, as I say, it's with a couple of stage partners, or maybe it's with another couple of early career teachers, or whatever you think is appropriate. Maybe a working group, something like that. But there's an opportunity there to do that. And I thought it was really interesting that came through. Coaching and mentoring, I think, is probably a question that when it's come up in the survey, people are keen to answer it, because those that have experienced being coached or are trained in coaching, I think, can visibly see and feel the positive impact that it has. And I know personally that if you have coaching, you want to talk about it afterwards, because you've got all these thoughts and things have become clearer and it really has made a difference. So the coaching and mentoring is something that people are very quick to say, yes, I've had, a coaching approach was used and this was the difference, this is the impact that it had. Or it's simply, no, I haven't had that. And it's a shame for those that are not getting that coaching approach used, with their within their PRD experience, because they're definitely missing out on something. So I think probably there was a real phase, there was really quite a focus, wasn't there, on coaching and mentoring a few years ago. Maybe it was more than a few years ago now, probably showing my age. It was quite a while ago anyway. And many of us went through coaching and mentoring training and then went on to deliver that to others. Perhaps it's time to come back to revisit that, and to again think about, when's it appropriate for coaching, when's it appropriate for mentoring, what's the difference, what does that look like, but again, what's the impact that it can actually have. I think as a reviewer, what it really helps do is it helps us make sure that we're actually listening. So if we are coaching in a PRD context, then we really are listening. We've somehow managed to leave the whole busyness of the day, of the week, outside the door. And we've come in and we've got 100% of our attention, our focus is with the reviewee, while we go through the process. And or the coachee, perhaps you should call them in this case, and we manage to really listen to what they're saying and have that conversation. Again, if we are a teacher going into the PRD situation, then it's good if we know a coaching approach is going to be used, because perhaps we managed to leave things at the door. We managed to plan in that time to clear a little space before we go into our review meeting, and actually think about what are the key things, that I'm preparing for, that I want to bring up in my meeting. So coaching and mentoring, just something to think about, how can we make sure that is being used consistently throughout the meetings. Next one, number 7. So again, I think this is an interesting one. Attention to those on the outskirts. And I thought that was a nice way of framing it. So those teachers that are not on permanent full-time contract, perhaps they're dotting in and out of different schools. They could even be, in different local authorities. How do we ensure that they are getting that PRD experience? So obviously, or we know that the responsibility sits with the teacher to ask for the PRD experience, but that can be, I can relate to how that must be uncomfortable if you're just a new teacher in the door, you're not familiar with the context. It would be great if that could be encouraged. But how do we actually, if PRD is not to be a one-off experience, how do we make sure that with people who are on supply, actually are coming back and revisiting what they've spoken about within their PRD, and they're not just somehow slipping through, feeling a bit forgotten about, perhaps not feeling as valued as they might? Because again, some of the messages that we hear from teachers is, that they so appreciate that time with their head teacher, with their deputy head, to have that PRD conversation, because it might be the only time in the year where they've got that absolute protected time with that senior member of staff, and they really value it. They really appreciate it. I don't think we can underestimate that. How do we make sure that also happens for teachers on the outskirts of what's perceived to be the norm. So again, something to think about that. And I think if there was a quick and easy fix to that, we would have it. We would know exactly what to do. It looks and feels different, I think, in different schools, in different authorities, but perhaps there's something about being able to share more about what good practice is so that other people can pick up the good ideas and run with them. Number 8 is about balance. So the balance struck between individual teachers who need to be recognised and treated as professionals who are responsible for their own learning and development, and balancing that with their requirement to receive the support and challenge that they need to champion their growth. I'm so glad I read that sentence last night, when I was looking at this, because it did take me several attempts to actually understand what that was saying. It's a long sentence. So we're trying to recognize the teacher as, or we're recognizing the teacher as a professional and everything that goes with that. But at the same time, if we're a reviewer, we absolutely need to be coming in with support and challenge. So nobody is beyond being supported. We would all value support in different areas, but actually, if we're going to grow, we need the challenge as well. That bit about the feedback, we absolutely need that if we're going to grow as we go through a career. So to do that, we require a focus on the development of a culture where teachers have agency, so they can make decisions, they can take responsibility, and their leadership values scaffold it, and the leadership values scaffold this. And not forgetting, of course, that in the standard for full registration, we recognise that every teacher is a leader. And it doesn't have to be somebody who's in a position as a senior leader. We are all leaders as registered teachers. Okay, number 9. All of this needs dedicated time to value and appreciate the importance of ongoing teacher development. So probably that's the one that people have been waiting for coming up, because they're thinking that's what I stressed when I filled in the survey. And I don't think anybody would dispute that. It's where does the time come from? How do we manage this to ensure that every member of staff gets their PRD? It shouldn't be something that the focus is on the classroom teachers, and actually as a senior leader, that's the PRD that doesn't happen because we didn't manage to get the time. So more consideration, or we need nationally, I think that needs to be considered, doesn't it, about where's the time going to come from, to give it the importance, this whole process, the importance that it deserves. And the final one, teaching standards need to live beyond the PRD process or an annual event. So kind of going full circle and back to what we were saying at the beginning, how do we actually bring the standards in consistently throughout the year? It's not just the sign-off time once a year or every 5 years, but how do we actually bring them in, bring them to life, make sure as teachers that we're living the standards, and that we are basically demonstrating what it means to belong to the teaching profession in Scotland. And I think that may have got me to the end of my slides, and I'm going to hand back to Victoria.
Thanks very much there, Elaine. So with all that in mind, and the fact that when Elaine was talking about all the information that we were drawing upon, one of the features that we have discovered is that a lot of the frustrations to do with professional update weren't actually to do with professional update itself. They were actually to do with the system that we had in place, MyPL. So you'll have heard us talking about new MyGTCS. When we talk about new MyGTCS, we're talking about a new platform called MyGTCS that brings together the current functions of our existing MyGTCS, MyPL, and provisionally registered profiles all into one place. For employers, it's also going to refresh our search the register related capabilities and provide lots of information to do with things like professional update and completion of professional update based on feedback that we have had from employers and from professional update leads. So early in this academic session, when we launched our first phase of New My GTCS really successfully to lots of provisionally registered teachers, we also wrote to all registrants on our register. And we shared with them that early in 2026, our system of recording would move from MyPL to New My GTCS. We would be launching New My GTCS early in 2026. We explained the points that I've popped on the screen. I'm not going to be reading each of those out to you. You'll be relieved to know. But this is the information that was contained in all the individual letters that was sent to them, and it was also shared with employers through directors of education, college principals, independent school head teachers, etc., so that everyone had sight of this information, and that New My GCCS is going to be coming. And so that awareness that perhaps time would be required in order to have some familiarisation with it. It's a very device-friendly platform, but really central to the whole development of New My GTCS are our standards. All the standards that relate to all the teachers who are on our register, right from their point of provisional registration all the way through. And when I'm talking about teachers, I am of course also talking about our college lecturer colleagues who are teachers of further education on the register of teachers. So any information from existing platforms for MyPL will be transferred securely across into the new platform when it is launching. And most importantly, for your information, teachers don't need to actually do anything at this stage in advance of being transferred. And they can continue to record their professional learning and update their details on the existing platforms as it is. We're also very aware that a small number of employers like to use an alternative platform, and what we are currently working very hard with Gateway in order to build integration between CPD Manager and the new My GTCS, so that the same functionality will exist. And obviously we will continue to keep yourselves and of course all the registrants updated of all progress to do with the development of new My GTCS as we come. What I should say as well is the fact that currently in MyPL, there's a facility for non-registered managers. Particularly within colleges, this is something that is a critical element when it comes to confirmation of a professional update. And there's a facility for non-registered managers to be set up, and that same facility will exist for new My GTCS as well. So we will continue to produce materials to support understanding of all things to do with professional update. We'll also continue to produce resources that will inform and update about ongoing digital development, timescales, what's going to happen when, to keep people very much involved in the process. But we are really aware that some individuals have raised with us that they are anxious round about the information that is currently being held within PL, and I would ask for your assistance in sharing the message that we will be transferring existing information across into the platform, of course, in a really secure and data-focused way. So, Elaine, can I ask you to talk through revalidation, please?
Thank you. As many of you will be aware, we have revised our revalidation process, and my colleague Jim Moore has been leading on that. So what we've done is, again, 10 years on, we have introduced a new process building on the experience that everybody has already had, if you like, around validation. And I'm sure those of you that have been in post for a while will have been a part of a validation at some point, and it was a very resource intensive, thorough process that we have been through in terms of validating all of the processes so far. So some have been, or indeed most over the 10 years have been validated and then revalidated. And the last time of revalidation, we actually went through a similar process to the original validation. And what we've done is we have reflected on that process. And what we're moving to now is a new process where employers are self-evaluating against their existing PU system. And they send that self-evaluation into us, which we're finding very, very interesting and very, very informative. So in that process, it's very clearly broken down in terms, or broken down into what's required of the requirements of a validated process, and the employer is putting against that what they have in place to meet that area, to meet those criteria. And we have a chance within the GTC to look at what's submitted, to review that, to click on all the links, to have a look at policy documents. And then there's also an opportunity for the employer to put in what their next steps are. So what they're planning to do in the future, what's going to make it even stronger, what's going to, make it even better. And again, it's really interesting for us to go in and look at that. But at the same time, what we're interested primarily in doing is making sure that that teachers are getting appropriate access, in terms of being able to have that experience to enable them to sign off their or to engage in the professional update process and to have their PRD conversation. Also important to us is that, for example, if a teacher wishes to appeal or to defer their PRD, that everything like that is in place, although hopefully it'll be for tiny numbers, but that there are processes in place which will manage those. Again, that's all part of it. So we've invited 37 employers to submit their revalidation, and I think we've got almost all of them in, and we've been working through them. And today it's been a very positive process so far, looking at what has been done. And I think what I'm finding from looking at it is it really is a lived process. It's not just a piece of paper that's being submitted to us. You can tell that the policies that are in place are absolutely being enacted. There's been a lot of reflection about things. Things have been updated and reviewed, and employers have got things to the best place that they can. But so far we've found as well that they've also welcomed any feedback that we've given, or if we've gone back just looking for a bit more clarity, that's all been forthcoming. So thank you for your engagement to date with that.
So really, what we really are talking about here throughout all of this, through the process, through the discussion about our new system, is impactful teacher development, where teachers are maintaining their registration, focused on the standards, and with standards permeating absolutely everything that they are doing on a day-to-day basis, not just on the ad hoc moment of, oh, I have my confirmation, or I have my PRD coming up, so I need to reflect on the standards at that point. So in order for having impactful teacher development, taking on board everything that Elaine has shared, and also the 10 key points that Pauline shared this morning, they really are summed up into what you see before you here in the embedded use of the professional standards, with teachers consistently engaging with GTC Scotland standards in order to guide their reflection, their planning, and their self-evaluation as leaders of learning. To have in place those high quality PRDs with that underlying focus on coaching conversations, because it was really interesting that in the data that came back when it came to reviewers, they were, I think it was, I believe it was 50% or approximately half of reviewers did not feel confident in coaching conversations and taking forward a coaching conversation. So that has an impact on PRD, and perhaps is something for pondering and reflection. The professional learning itself, there has perhaps been a move over time, we're seeing as well, of people recording lots and lots of activities as opposed to really reflecting on their professional learning and thinking about the impact of that. So it's the reflection that's important, not the capturing of absolutely every professional learning activity that has been taken forward. The collaborative learning, that power of team, that power of taking the time and to have those discussions and learning from and with colleagues, that came through, as Elaine said, loud and clear as being one of the most highly valued sources of collaborative and professional learning and development, providing that deeper engagement with standards, and helping in relation to system-wide reform as well. That personal ownership and that independence of individuals to have autonomy over their learning, taking into consideration requirements of the context in which they work, but that having those individual needs that challenges their thinking and their practice. The equity of access being fundamental, and we've spoken quite a lot this afternoon about those who are perhaps on the outer edges of our systems. And so it's how we can share the ideas and share learning about how everyone can really experience quality teacher development. And that time and support, it always comes down to time, doesn't it? But having that time, that dedicated time for thinking, for reflection, and ultimately for that consideration of impact, and that leadership, that individual leadership of learning, and within that culture of those in formal leadership taking forward coaching conversations, and also colleagues and those daily interactions that they have in order to scaffold and grow people's own development and learning. So really, with that in mind, Elaine, you have a call to action that you are wanting to pose, don't you?
I do, yeah. So, having listened to all of that, and I think probably as I mentioned at the beginning, perhaps you were able to, as we went through those slides, you were able to think about your own experience of professional update, and also if you are a reviewer for professional update. So thinking about the experience for everybody that's involved, the key findings that we've got, and actually the question I obviously need to put to you is, so what? You know, based on everything that we said, so what? How can you support impactful teacher development based on, or with the contribution of what we've shared today? And I can see in the chat there's already the beginnings of those conversations are happening, and there's support not just within schools but across local authorities and the wider system. But there's it's very difficult, you know, if we were all in person, we could go away and have a chat about these things and feedback. It's all difficult to manage online, but that's what our ask would be, is if you could leave today, have that question fresh in your mind, and in preparation for protecting time for a PRD conversation, see if you can protect some time to actually think about this with colleagues about how you can support impactful teacher development. And it'll be great to see the results of that. Victoria, will I hand back across to you to segue into the next session?
Certainly, thank you. Thanks, Elaine, for doing that. So thank you, everyone. Hope that has been informative. Trust that it has been. As I said, if we haven't managed to pick up any comments or questions within the chat, we will do that immediately after the session. So please do keep an eye on them. And very shortly, we will move to our session 4, which is Jennifer McDonald and Vivian White, who will be talking together about working together to manage concerns about teachers. And so we've got approximately five minutes there before we rejoin there. So please do take advantage of the breaks, stretch your legs, etc. Grab a cup of tea, and then please come back and join us for Vivian and Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. Bye.